Two men started Netflix on the exact same day in 1997. Today, one is worth an estimated $2 billion or more. The other is estimated at around $60 million. He was the one who thought of it. This is the real story of Netflix, the one before the red logo, before the billions. It starts with an idea, a checkbook, and a corner office that changed hands. But here's the question almost nobody ever asks. If Marc Randolph invented Netflix and ran it first, why isn't his name the one everybody knows? The answer starts with a car ride, a shared commute, and an idea that seemed far too strange to ever work. It began as nothing more than a passing comment between two friends, driving the same road they always drove, on their way to another ordinary workday. Picture two career paths splitting from the exact same starting line, inside the same small California office. One man stayed behind a desk, testing ideas nobody else believed in yet. The other held the checkbook, and in a young company, whoever holds the checkbook tends to hold the future too. Somewhere in that quiet, almost invisible moment, the fortunes of both men were set on two very different courses, and neither of them could have known it at the time. You've probably heard the popular Netflix origin story, a $40 late fee on a blockbuster rental. It's a great story. Marc Randolph himself has said, in his own memoir, that it isn't true. The real idea started somewhere far less dramatic. The real idea started on the 40-minute commute he and Reed Hastings shared along Highway 17. Personalized shampoo, and dozens of other consumer ideas, were floated and dropped. One of them was a mail-order video rental service. Only that one idea stuck. To test if a disc could survive the mail at all, Randolph mailed a CD inside a greeting card envelope to Hastings' house. It arrived intact, without a scratch. That cheap experiment proved the whole business was possible. Netflix was founded in 1997, a mail-order DVD rental company in Scotts Valley, California, with fewer than 1,000 movie titles available to rent. Marc Randolph became the company's first CEO. He hired the first employees, designed the first logo, built the first website, and personally packed and shipped some of the very first DVDs himself. But there was one problem. Reed Hastings had put in almost all the money, and money, in a young company, usually decides who's really in charge. Hastings had just sold his previous software company for hundreds of millions of dollars. Into Netflix, he personally put $2.5 million of his own cash. That single number, $2.5 million, dwarfed what anyone else had put into the young company. It made him Netflix's largest shareholder virtually overnight. Money bought him more than shares. It bought him the title of chairman and a seat at the head of every future decision Netflix would make. In most young companies, that title matters more than people realize. A chairman doesn't just attend a board meeting, he sets the agenda for it. Every year, in every meeting, the person who wrote the biggest check gets to speak first, and gets to speak last. Randolph still ran daily operations, but the room itself had already told him who was really steering the company forward. For now, Randolph stayed CEO. Netflix rented DVDs one at a time, charged late fees just like Blockbuster and the video stores it was trying to replace, and quietly struggled to find enough real customers. The company almost didn't survive its first year. Nobody was renting movies by mail yet. Randolph and his small team were burning cash with no clear answer. Then, in 1998, the board made a decision that would define the rest of Marc Randolph's life. They decided Netflix needed a different kind of CEO. Reed Hastings, the man who wrote the biggest check, became Netflix's new chief executive officer. Marc Randolph, the man who invented the whole idea, was moved to president. Netflix's early board included the venture capitalists who had backed Hastings' money, not Randolph's idea. When it came time to vote on leadership, they sided with the man who held the most shares. It happened quietly. No public announcement, no dramatic headline. Just a new name on the door and a new voice leading every investor call. No press release went out. No employees were gathered in a room to hear the news together. The change simply took effect, and the company moved forward as if it had always been this way. Randolph later said he understood why it happened. Hastings had the money, the Stanford computer science degree, and the kind of confidence investors trusted with millions. But understanding it didn't make it easy. He had built the company from a whiteboard idea into a real business, and now someone else held the top title. Randolph didn't quit. As president, he kept working, testing ideas, pushing the company toward the model that would eventually save it. Subscriptions instead of single rentals. In 1999, Netflix dropped late fees entirely and launched a flat monthly subscription for under $20. No due dates. Unlimited rentals, mailed in that now iconic red envelope. It was the idea that finally clicked with customers. Subscribers started climbing. What began as a struggling mail-order experiment was turning into a real company, one that might actually survive the dot-com crash coming in 2000. Randolph, still president, kept shaping the company's culture and strategy. But every major decision now ran through Hastings first. The company was his to steer. Meetings still needed Randolph's ideas and his instincts for what customers actually wanted. But when it came to final approval, there was only one name that mattered in the room. By 2001, Netflix's subscriber base had grown into the hundreds of thousands. The company Randolph started in a small office was becoming a real threat to video rental stores everywhere. In 2000, Netflix was still losing money, so its founders offered to sell the entire company to Blockbuster for $50 million. According to Randolph's own account, Blockbuster's executives all but laughed them out of the room, a decision that's now infamous, since Blockbuster is gone and Netflix is worth billions. In May 2002, Netflix went public on the stock market. It was a milestone moment, but it also revealed exactly how small Randolph's slice had become. Years of new funding rounds had diluted his ownership again and again, every time the company needed more cash to survive the years before profitability. By the IPO in 2002, his stake was a small fraction of what it once was. Hastings, by contrast, still held the largest share. He had paid for that position back in 1997, and every dilution round afterward, he still came out on top. Randolph stayed on as president for a while longer. But by 2002, not long after the IPO, he stepped down from that role too. The company he had once run day-to-day now had layers of executives between him and the decisions that used to cross his own desk. He remained on Netflix's board for a while longer. Then, a few years after the IPO, he left the company entirely, the man who invented it, walking out the door for good. For years afterward, almost nobody outside Silicon Valley knew his name. The company kept growing, survived the dot-com crash, and pivoted from DVDs to streaming in 2007. Netflix became a global entertainment giant under Hastings' name, not his. By the 2010s, Reed Hastings was a household name in business circles, worth billions of dollars as Netflix's stock kept climbing higher every single year. Mark Randolph, meanwhile, had quietly moved on, investing in startups, sitting on boards, mostly unrecognized as the man who once ran the company from its very first day. So here's that number again. Reed Hastings' estimated net worth, over $2 billion. Mark Randolph's estimated net worth, around $60 million. both started Netflix on the very same day. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what's next. An estimated $60 million is still an extraordinary amount of money for one man. But next to the fortune Hastings built, it's a rounding error. So why didn't Randolph fight harder to keep his title, his shares, and his place at the very top of the company he dreamed up from nothing? After Netflix, Randolph became a full-time startup advisor and investor, working with companies far outside the entertainment industry. He also joined several public company boards, quietly building a second career most people never noticed. The red envelope Randolph helped design became so recognizable that people kept them as keepsakes for decades. It's a small piece of design history most people don't realize traces back to him, not to Hastings. In 2019, Randolph finally told his own side of the story in a memoir. It became a bestseller and revealed just how close Netflix came to failing entirely in its first 2 years. In it, he admitted something surprising: he didn't see the CEO swap as a betrayal. He called it the right business decision for the company to survive. Hastings had the money and the risk tolerance investors wanted. Randolph, in his own words, was better at coming up with the ideas than running a big company. Still, it's hard not to wonder. If Randolph had kept the CEO title all the way to the IPO, would history remember a different name at the top of Netflix? We'll never know. What we do know is the number that quietly tells the whole story: $2.5 million, invested in 1997, turned into an estimated $2 billion gap. It's one of the clearest lessons in modern business history. In a startup, the idea matters enormously, but the money almost always decides who ends up keeping the title, and who ends up writing the memoir instead. Randolph has said he holds no bitterness. He got to build something that changed how the entire world watches movies and television, and that, to him, was the real win. But the numbers still tell a story worth remembering, long after the headlines fade. The first CEO of one of the biggest companies on earth is worth a small fraction of the man who eventually replaced him. Every founder dreams of building something huge, something that changes an entire industry. Almost nobody plans carefully enough for what happens when someone else ends up owning the biggest share of it. Netflix today serves hundreds of millions of subscribers across nearly every country on earth. In recent years, it's been worth well over $150 billion as a company on the stock market. Randolph's original idea built the foundation for all of it. And the mail-order DVD business that started this whole story? Netflix finally shut it down in 2023, 26 years after that first disc survived the mail intact. By then, streaming had made the DVDs obsolete. But the idea Mark Randolph tested with a homemade envelope in 1997 had already changed entertainment forever. So next time you open Netflix on your phone, remember, the man who actually thought of it isn't the billionaire whose name people know. He's the $60 million man who quietly built the idea while somebody else became the $2 billion name attached to it. It's a reminder that in business, inventing something and owning something are two completely different things, and history tends to remember the inventor, while only one of them actually shows up in your bank account. Mark Randolph still calls himself lucky. He got to help invent something that changed how the entire planet spends its evenings. But somewhere between that whiteboard idea and the $2 billion gap, one truth stands out. The person who starts the company isn't always the one who ends up owning it. So here's the real question worth asking. If you had the idea but somebody else had the money, how much of your own company would you be willing to give up? Would you have taken the $2.5 million even if it meant losing the company you built? Tell us in the comments.